The term Epiphany means the appearance, or something that has appeared. It's actually a Greek word that's transliterated into English, and it's a kind of a compound word. I mean, it's epi, to come, and phono, which means to shine light. And so if you imagine Jesus, you know, the pre-incarnate Christ, the Messiah, from eternity to eternity, existing as the Son of God, and you're going throughout human history. And going through Advent, we were looking at the prophets in the Old Testament and seeing where the prophecies about the Messiah, about the Christ, where they showed up. And it's almost as if the Messiah were waiting in the shadows for the time to come. We know and we see his presence throughout the Old Testament. We see the prophecies regarding his coming in the prophets' messages. And then the incarnation happens when God becomes man and the Virgin Mary is indwelled with the Holy Spirit, and she conceives the Christ child in her womb. And he's born into the world. That is the first Epiphany. It's actually Christmas morning. It's the first manifestation of God among his people in the Christmas story. And it's the coming into the light, out of the shadows and into the light. In some of the Eastern churches, they call it theophany, which means like an appearance of God. It's similar to the term Epiphany. And they're just being a little bit more specific that what we celebrate in the Epiphany is the appearance of God among his people, or the manifestation of God among his people. And it's interesting because in the Eastern and Western traditions, if I can give you a little bit of history here, there's differences in the way that they do the celebration. In the West, they had what's called the Arian controversy. And Arius was a guy who taught that Jesus was not the Christ from his conception. He wasn't the Son of God in the Virgin Mary, but that he was a creation of God who was begotten and something like adopted to become the Son of God. But that he wasn't divine in his conception, he wasn't divine in his eternity. And so in reaction to this controversy, the Western Church decided that it would be important to celebrate the Nativity, Christmas, to really focus on this significant event of God becoming man. And so they broke out Christmas, and Christmas comes in 12 days before the celebration that we call Epiphany. And if you've ever heard the song, the song The 12 Days of Christmas, on the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. Those 12 days, that song is not it doesn't do anything necessarily for us as like a worship song or theologically, but it shows us that people were celebrating a 12-day Christmas, and that is from the day that Christmas begins until the Epiphany. The celebration of Epiphany that we're celebrating today is actually the culmination, if you will, of Christmas. It starts with the first Epiphany, the Nativity, and then it goes through many different epiphanies, if you will. And so in the Western Church, they looked at the Nativity and they said, well, that's God sending his son Jesus to be his revelation, his manifestation for his people, because Jesus is a Jew. He did his ministry primarily among the Jewish people. But then they looked to a second narrative that's the three kings bringing gifts to Jesus. And they looked to that narrative and they said, this is actually the revelation or the manifestation of God among the Gentiles. And so they said so they took that story of the three kings and they made that the Epiphany celebration. And so you get the incarnation on Christmas, and then you get the three kings on Epiphany. In the Eastern churches, and before this separation, they would celebrate many manifestations of God amongst his people. And we're gonna focus on actually a different one, not the three kings story, but we're gonna focus today on another, what is sometimes considered the last of the Epiphany. Or I'm sorry, it's actually not the last. It's the second to the last of the Epiphanies, which is Jesus' baptism. Jesus' baptism. And Jesus' baptism is a demonstration of Epiphany. It is a demonstration of God among his people, God manifesting himself among his people. And so with that said, let me read you our text. It comes from Matthew 3, verses 13 through 17. And I'm going to reference back to it a number of times throughout the message. But here's what it says. It says, Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan. This is John the Baptist, to be baptized by him. But John tried to stop him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and yet you come to me? Jesus answered him, allow it for now, because this is the way for us to fulfill all righteousness. So John allowed him to be baptized. When Jesus was baptized, he went up immediately from the water. The heavens suddenly opened for him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming down on him, and a voice from heaven said, this is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased.